Hello and welcome to the CDW Canada Tech Talks podcast. I'm your host, KJ Burke, Field CTO for Hybrid Infrastructure at CDW Canada. Today I'm joined by Kelly LaForest and Brian Matthews. Kelly is our Microsoft 365 Cloud Consultant and Trainer. Brian Matthews is our Head of Services Strategy and Development for Digital Workspace. So I really appreciate both of you jumping on the podcast and talking about it. Today, we want to talk a little bit about, AI tools. One of the things I've talked about on the podcast before is if we divide AI up into a couple of different areas, we've got AI tools for individuals, we've got AI tools for teams, we've got AI tools for larger organizations, and AI tools for our external customers. So if we really want to focus in on AI tools that we're seeing individuals use in their day-to-day. But before we do that, Kelly, if you could maybe introduce yourself, kind of your background, what you've been doing at CDW, and give us a feel for, the skill set that you bring to the table.
Sure, absolutely. I've actually just been with CDW for 3 years now. I just got my plaque in the mail, which was really cool and exciting. I joined originally to focus on SharePoint and information and data management, and as well help customers with rollouts of Microsoft Teams and other office productivity apps. As my role evolved, it became clear that things were changing, things were shifting, and AI was becoming the hot topic. And so I was really excited to get the opportunity to join the Early Adopters Program, not only as a user of Microsoft's Copilot here as a CDW employee, but also to help our customers with learning how to get ready for AI in the workplace and how to help their employees and staff use it as individuals to do more with less.
Yeah, and I think that's really helped out because as we've been talking to customers about AI, a lot of organizations just don't know where to start. And so I think the function that you're filling in and helping organizations, do some of that discovery, find some of those paths forward is really interesting. And then Brian, we've been talking about so you and I, with the acquisition, we got pretty close. But so you've kind of become, in my mind, one of the faces of CDW Canada. Could you talk a little bit about your role and how you're focusing in on these tools as well?
Yep. So from a services strategy and development standpoint, it's my team's job to understand where the market is going, what new technologies are being adopted and needed by our clients, where we need to make investments into our own capabilities, our own skill sets. If we look at AI, there was not a abundance of existing AI capabilities in the way that we needed it to help solve what we're going to talk about today, which is AI for the individual. So we had to, look across our own internal organization, look out into the external market for people with unique skill sets like Kelly, right? She talked about her background in data governance and data management. Clearly that has a really important part to play when we talk about, AI for the user, looking at other M365 skill sets, other Microsoft skill sets, other skill sets outside of, the Microsoft ecosystem. So when my team does their job right, we understand what's happening in the market, we place the right bets, and then we really activate the CDW engine across our professional services team, our managed services team, our sales organization, our marketing engine, to make sure that we're all rowing in the same direction and really adding as much value as we can to our clients.
Yeah, and when I think about it, one of the the really interesting things that I think both Kelly and Brian, you guys bring to the mix here is an inquisitiveness. Like we're all trying to kind of figure this out together. How do we go forward? And I think to start, we need people asking questions, experimenting, and so I think that's really powerful, especially as we get into sort of uncharted areas like this one. So let's talk a little bit about you both individually and kind of where you see AI tools and how you're taking advantage of them in your sort of day to day. And because I think we want to establish kind of where are we at currently. So Kelly, when you think of your day to day, how has tools that you use to optimize your workflow, maybe streamline some of the effort that you do to get your day-to-day done. How does that manifest, and what are you using tools for?
I think I'll start with addressing the fact that, there's a lot of work to get done. There's not as many hours in the day as I would like to be able to do the things I have to get done on the timelines I need. And so there'll also be situations where I'm double booked. I need to be in two places at once, but I can't. So right out the gate, I'm using AI tools to help me catch up on what's been going on in meetings that I can't attend. Preparing for meetings to be able to remember what we talked about last time so that I'm using people's time most effectively. I'd also say too, a lot of the work I do is trying to find answers for customers, and using AI tools to help me get to those answers faster is something I'm doing probably for a good 40% of my day.
Yeah, and I think it's important there too, because you're right, there's more than enough work to go around. And so when you can optimize that workflow, it's pretty powerful. And so Brian, when you think about some of the ways that you're using tools, how does that manifest in your sort of day-to-day?
Yeah, I think I resonate really well with a lot of what Kelly mentioned. I am not getting any younger. I have more commitments outside of my work life than I used to have, and I've got a larger desire to find that appropriate work-life balance. So for me, my interest in AI for the user was really framed from that perspective, or at least birthed from that perspective. You mentioned curiosity. I think that's the key to success here. Being humble enough to ask questions and understand that this is such a nascent technology and there is so much to learn. If I zoom in on some of the ways that I really leverage the tools right now, I think it's about what I would call the current state AI utility and spending as much time as I can individually in that world versus the AI hype world. Because if I can focus on the things that can add extra seconds or minutes back to my day, and then once I've identified something like that, can I turn it from an interaction to a habit? So for example, meeting notes, right? I don't need to take my own meeting notes. I don't have to ask anybody else in a meeting to take meeting notes. I know that it's just going to happen, right? And now I know that there's huge value in that, and that can just be a habit that I use moving forward. Following meetings, I get double booked, like we all get double booked. So following meetings that I can't attend, I use it as a real-time research assistant. So whether I'm working on a project, whether I'm in a team meeting and we're bouncing ideas off each other, right? Somebody was asking last week, hey, we need a cool name for this project. And I just threw it in and said, give me 5 cool names for a project, with this parameters. And, 4 of them didn't really line up. 1 of them was good enough. And we started to drill down on that one that, was good enough, at least as a starting point. So, using it to make myself better, right? So if I think about my current capabilities and the output and the productivity I can have, how can I leverage the tools to not only take away or speed up or make improvements to the way I do my work, but how can I use the tools to make my work even better, even stronger, even more productive? So just a couple of ways that I'm using it.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, because I think there are a couple of things that you both I think touched on. So one of those is taking away some of the especially with like meetings, being able to capture those notes in real time, being able to be 2 places at once, because again, like is it a meeting I really needed to attend and participate, or did I just need to be informed of that meeting? Or if I'm trying to balance between 2, at least I could choose the one where I needed to be most present. But when you have an assistant taking notes for you, it also means you can be more active in that meeting, right? And especially when you are pivoting from one topic to the next, being able to be focused and be present, I think that's a big value add. So if we're able to maybe better optimize our time or be more focused while we're offloading some of the functions that AI can help with. Kelly, one of the things that you've been doing, a lot of is getting in front of customers and doing workshops and really sort of drilling into, use cases and sort of making AI tooling relevant for customers. What are some of the other, drivers for organizations looking at AI? And maybe you could talk a little bit about expectations versus reality in some of those workshops that you do.
There is this fear that we hear from people that AI is going to take your job. And what I hear when I talk to senior leadership, business decision makers within organizations is that's not what they're trying to do. They're not trying to let go of staff. They're trying to retain the talent they have. They're trying to give them tools to help with their employee experience, have it be more positive, reduce burnout. And that's not necessarily something we can quantify. It's often around their sentiment. Are they feeling more positive? Are they feeling like they can shift to that more meaningful work? There's also a desire sometimes to try and reduce money being spent. So recently I was working with an organization where their marketing team has to outsource a lot of different projects to a third party agency. And they said, you know what, we've been trying to do the same thing with Copilot to see if it can generate similar ideas and campaigns for us, and then we can bring that work back in-house. So I'm able to do more, the quality stays good, and we're saving the company money.
Yeah, and
I could go on for a long time, but those are just two that come to mind.
Oh, it's great, and I think that is. I mean, I think that one of the through lines there is helping the people that are part of your organization be more impactful, and I've always been really set in that the people within your organization know the needs of the organization better than anybody sort of external. So even if it's a great third party or a great consulting company, they're not necessarily in the trenches day to day doing that day to day work, working with all those people. And so if you can take out the commodity work and optimize that and get people thinking more and get people aligning with the business, I think there's a lot of value in that. So Brian, when you're talking to customers, a lot of times you're talking before they've even gotten to the workshop state. What are some of the expectations of the value of some of these AI tools, and then when you start to drill down, how does that manifest into value that they're trying to quantify and measure as they deploy tools?
Yeah, it's a great question, and we work with lots of clients, so it's hard to paint everybody with the same brush, but there's definitely some commonalities and some themes. A lot of times, and we've seen this with previous innovative technology revolutions, that they don't know why they need AI, right? They haven't spent the time asking the questions and having internal stakeholder meetings. It's just this desire to get to AI, right? Maybe we were late for cloud, and we're not going to make that same mistake again. We're going to be an early adopter of AI. So obviously that's not an ideal strategy, and I think a lot of the work that Kelly does and other members of the team and the conversations that I have is to really understand, where is each client right now? Where are they in their journey? Because there's different tactics, there's different tools, there's different strategies that we can help them implement to meet them where they are on their journey and help them take that next step. I think it's also very important to be real with our clients, and I think Kelly does a great job of this in terms of dispelling some of the myths or some of the falsehoods or some of the hype versus reality around utility, and just having a really honest conversation based on what we see both internally in our usage and what we see from all the clients that we work with across Canada.
Oh, it's good. And so one of the differences I've noticed with AI, like you mentioned cloud, for instance, I think inside of an organization, if you think of like a new ERP system or maybe a new ticketing system or something like that, a lot of times, as that is being scoped and defined by management or leadership in an organization, they already have an idea about how to approach that. And so, I mean, one of the differences that I get the feeling, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but with AI, it seems like there's a desire that you call out, but management and leadership doesn't seem to have the game plan all the time for the AI, like what they're actually going to get once they've deployed it. All right, so Kelly, when you're talking to frontline workers versus leadership at an organization, do you feel that management and leadership is coming into these with a good definition of their expectations, how they're going to measure success, or is it a bit of a split brain situation?
To be honest, I would say that in most cases, neither leadership nor the information workers have that clear picture. And that's what these workshops are doing. It's getting everyone in the room, it's getting everyone on the same page, and it's helping them build that plan. What I see quite frequently is workshops get set up and IT wants the workshop to just be them. They don't want to include the people doing the work, and I have to tell them, you're going to be definitely participating. We need you, the technical readiness side, but from an organizational maturity perspective, we have to have these people in the room, because even if we have leadership in the room saying from a big picture what the goals and strategic objectives are of the organization, it's the people doing the work that understand the roadblocks, the challenges, and how they plan to use it. There was a really interesting statistic I read today on LinkedIn. Karen Skapsky, she's a senior solution architect with Microsoft for Copilot, was posting that 3 out of 4 people are using AI for work, but a lot of these tools are not authorized by their employers. Yeah. And so that's the other thing too, is that I think leadership is like, we know people are using these things, but we have some concerns around making sure they're using the right tool, that it's safe, that it's compliant. And so another part of that is when we get everyone in the room talking, we can understand why they're using those other tools. And then we can help them match, like Brian was saying, the right tool either from Microsoft or another AI provider to meet that need.
Yeah, and I tell you're chomping at the bit too. So I'll tee that one up for you in a second. I think that there is a bit of a delta there. I think you called out something really important, and one of the key differentiators to me is that for most of these technologies, it could just be the application people in the room. It could just be the IT people in the room. In this situation, you need the frontline workers, and it's because that's where the bulk of the work is being done. I mean, growing up in an organization, being in IT my whole career, you always kind of view IT as sort of the center of the universe. Whether it is or not is dependent upon your industry. But you're right. You need that frontline worker. You're really engaged. And then Brian, on the note of data and information, you're working on a study. Could you maybe just talk about a little bit? By the time the podcast goes live, we should have a link to the study, in the podcast notes or on the YouTube description notes.
Yeah, no, it's what I was chomping at the bit to get into, to use your term there. We wanted to go out to the Canadian market in partnership with Angus Reid and one of our third-party marketing organizations, Kaiser Partners, and understand what and how AI tools are being used inside of Canadian organizations. We wanted to understand barriers and obstacles for user adoption. We wanted to contrast what IT decision makers thought was happening versus what end users are saying is happening. So to the stat that Kelly mentioned, we've absolutely got a couple of our own stats that we look forward to publishing. I think at the end of the day, the way in which these tools are going to help us work is going to change how we work. And if your users are going to fundamentally change how they are working, they need to be at the table to understand and learn how to use these tools effectively. And just as much as there may be, I mentioned earlier, some executives that are just saying that they need to get to AI because they don't want to be late to AI, what we're seeing is user adoption, right? And if we predate, Microsoft Copilot and some of the new things that are available for business, ChatGPT was one of the fastest adopted technologies in the history of technology, right? Users saw this tool, they saw value in this tool, and they were ready to go all in on this tool. So if organizations aren't working very actively and investing heavily to make sure that their organization is ready for this and that their organization has put the appropriate guardrails and done the right work from a data management perspective, that could be a very scary scenario. I think you had, coined the idea in my head, at least, around this could be the largest shadow IT event in history. And I would go maybe one thing further and say it also has a bigger impact, or there's a bigger risk with this shadow IT than maybe previous shadow ITs, just based on the power of these AI tools.
Yeah, I could easily see us being in annual, cybersecurity training, as well as annual, AI governance training around, the data we're putting in, the data that we're training on, the data, the way we're utilizing it, all of that. So. Absolutely. So Kelly, having worked with some of our customers around, tool adoption and some of these workshops that really lead into projects and culminate in deploying of these tools, what are some of the ways that these projects stall? Like, with some of the larger AI projects, one of the challenges we really have is we tend not to set good measurements, and so when you look at tooling, why do some organizations feel that their Copilot rollout has failed, or they're not getting value out of those tools, and what are some of those barriers?
Well, I think people are going to struggle with prioritization. They'll get to it later. They're busy. To have to learn a new tool. Although, to be frank, I mean, this isn't like other technology where, let's say the internet came out. You couldn't just like hand someone the internet and say, go for it. You had to really learn how to use it. Even like a digital camera, you had to read a manual to figure out how to use this thing. With Copilot, yes, you can, or an AI productivity tool, you can open it up and start talking to it conversationally, but you have to learn how to talk to it, just like you need to learn how to talk to your peers or coworkers, giving the correct level of detail, not being too vague, that sort of thing. Also, helping people understand what is the task we're trying to achieve and how are we going to measure this, as you said. So is there some way we can tie a quantitative metric to this where we can actually measure if things are improving or not? So what I'll often do is try to work with them either around time and saying, well, how much time does this take you today? How much time, if you saved, would you be happy about saving? And then how would you reinvest that time? What would you use that time for? And then when people start to connect the dots, they're going, okay, no, wait, I could use this time I'm gaining back for personal, professional development or work-life balance or taking on other tasks that have been on my plate for a long time. And they start to feel more empowered and excited to do the work that really, we need a proof of concept. We need them to prove that it's going to do what they need to then be able to be ready for the larger pilot that's rolling out to other groups. I want to say one more point. What else causes it to stall? The people are ready, but IT is not. And they either have technical debt or they have some projects that they've been meaning to get to for a long time around data classification, security and compliance, or even just the way they structure their data. And there hasn't been that driver to get those things done. Other things have been more important. And now, because of this, and AI, people need them to get it done. And a big part of that is often those projects I was speaking about rely on end users to actually do part of that work. They have to clean up their data. They have to give us how to categorize our sensitive information types. But if they're not participating and now they have a reason to want to participate, I think it is really going to push people to get things done. But sometimes they may be 6 months, 12 months or more out from being truly able to push this out to the whole organization.
Yeah, and I think that also, again, highlights why you need to have those frontline workers like in the room, having the conversations, being engaged. It's a lot easier to get them to do some of those actions when they're really involved in the process and sharing the success. So Brian, as you're talking to customers, what are some of the things that really cause barriers to maybe spring up where everybody's gung-ho, everybody's ready to go, and then all of a sudden we hit a bit of a stumbling block?
Kelly mentioned that the users are ready and IT isn't. I would say even sometimes IT is ready and security isn't. Right. And I know you had mentioned security, but I think that is still one of the biggest hurdles. And I, have a lot of empathy for all of the cybersecurity professionals out there because the threat landscape is ever evolving and the stakes, again, are very high. And, this is just another, vector and another area that they're going to have to be really, really thoughtful about as AI AI adoption rolls out. And, I think, we talked a lot about Copilot. Obviously, there's lots of other large LLM models out there, right? People could be, using ChatGPT at work, and there's been some headlines around some of the consequences of that, right? Whether it's Claude, whether it's Gemini, obviously Apple and the way that they've rolled out Apple Intelligence. Not all of these tools are the same or trying to solve for the same pieces, but I think all of them do have security implications that, again, those security professionals are going to have to be very, very thoughtful about. The other interesting thing too is, when there's this much choice in a nascent industry, it could lead to a very splintered landscape, right? And again, even in this, if we use a hypothetical scenario of a company that's done everything right and to get prepared, and they've done the workshops and the training, and maybe they've landed on Copilot, and obviously maybe they have a lot of Apple devices in their fleet, so Apple Intelligence is just kind of baked into all their new Apple hardware. What's the plan for the shadow IT or the shadow AI IT, and how is the organization going to think about that and respond to that? Because users are going to go where they get the best experience, right? Even when they're told that this is the one path, if they're getting a faster answer, a more thoughtful answer, a better output, right, an easier user experience, we're going to have a splintered adoption, which again is only going to, create more complexity from a security perspective.
Yeah, and both you and Kelly mentioned, data and access to data, and you're right. I mean, safeguards around the data. I think all of that is big. With customers that you've dealt with, what percentage of those customers would you say you'd give, an A credit score for their data management practices?
Yeah, I mean, Kelly has way more of these conversations than I do, but the feeling I have is a very small percentage of organizations, and it's not necessarily across certain, organizational sizes, right? I think there may be this idea that larger organizations have enough resources and a big enough budget to do these things right, and maybe small businesses, really struggle. I think we see organizations across, whether it's the corporate space, the public sector space, across industries. I think that this is a very large challenge for a lot of our clients. And again, the need to do these things properly hasn't changed, but with AI, again, the stakes are a little bit higher because one mistake can lead to a much, bigger problem inside the walls of an IT organization.
Yeah, and so Kelly, when we drill down into that a little bit deeper, what percentage of organizations, or just sort of a rough feel, do you have that really have a good concept and handle on their data, their data cleanliness, they've got good risk mitigation and governance of data? What does that sort of look like for the customers you're doing workshops for?
I don't want to name names, and I don't want to paint a negative picture of anyone, but the truth is, it's a very low number of people that are getting that A+ score, as you mentioned. But I think, to be honest, the majority of them know that. They know where they have work to do. They've done a lot of the planning, but now they're just trying to do things in a mindful way, so they're getting it done right. And it makes the journey a little slower. But for me, frankly, it's really refreshing to have so many organizations taking their data management seriously. I've been working around Microsoft SharePoint in that space for over 10 years. And we've been telling these organizations these best practices the whole time. And they're finally starting to listen, like I mentioned a little bit earlier. So one challenge is, half of the people I've worked with haven't moved their data, well, maybe not half, I'll say a quarter of people haven't moved their data to the cloud. They're still dealing with on-premises. A lot of the projects they do outside of Copilot are migrations to the cloud. But the people that are doing the workshops have usually, most of them got it to the cloud, but there's some that haven't. And we can absolutely extend AI productivity tools into on-premises file shares and other places. But those are usually, people are hoarding data. It's a lot of information, and the data quality is so integral for the data AI tools to work and give good answers. The other half, they're in the cloud, so they don't have that barrier. But now they're again dealing with situations where when they're starting to use AI tools, well, when that prompt was used by an employee, when that prompt generated a response and there's a reference, like it's referring to certain files, well, were those files containing sensitive information? Yeah. How do we know if we're dealing with risk here or not? And if we're not labeling our data, we have a harder time identifying that. It makes it very much like a needle in a haystack for administrators of the tenants and the environments to figure out if things are going well or not. So I'd say that I think the biggest piece that people are still working on or focusing on is the data classification and data labeling. And that will probably be the top thing that people will use as a barrier to getting into Copilot faster. But we do help some of them say, well, there's ways you can start using it today. These AI tools can be used safely in some ways, but you've got to, again, put a lot of those controls in place to limit what it can have access to and have a good idea of what people have access to today.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And where I'm talking to customers is really starting with governance. Like what do we like what is the game plan? How do we deal with risky data? What types of data do we have that's risky? What is good, like setting some goals and objectives. What is good data cleanliness? And also how do we prune bad data? Like it's great to have examples of data out there, but especially if I'm doing any sort of content generation, the more quality data that we have in there, the better off. And the other thing I think is kind of critical for organizations to understand is the more time they spend with the data, creating those processes, curating the data, taking out risky data, mitigating that risky data. It probably still has use, but it shouldn't necessarily be in a SharePoint drive where everybody can get to it. The more value that curated data set has. And so not only for AI, but I think, Kelly, one of the things you sort of mentioned earlier was there's all these other things that we wanted to do when we had good control of our data. Things like data loss prevention. We wanted to better support business continuity with data resiliency. There's all these other things that I think once we have good data management and data curation, it sort of opens up the door to do all of those things. So I think it's really critical. And you're right. What I'm hearing with organizations is, poor data management, not having good governance controls, not having a game plan, and then not having tooling that supports all of that is really a barrier. So kind of as a follow-up then, what are some of the once you have a game plan, you know what you're going to do with your data, what are some of the tools that you guys have run into, maybe start with you, Brian, just around data classification? So I've got a game plan, my people are doing the right things. How do we what are some of the things you're running into to help with some of that data curation?
Yeah, I'll probably defer to Kelly on some of the tools specifically because she has forgotten more about data management and data classification than I'll ever know. But I think the reality is, and I'll tie back to the kind of the workshops that we talked about, and one other idea that Kelly mentioned is the workshops, the readiness assessments, whether it's the technical readiness assessments or other workshops. It's really to slow down to be able to speed up. And I think there's this desire to move so quickly into AI, to jump on this adoption rocket of AI. It's somewhat unnatural to slow down to speed up, but I think it's absolutely the right approach. And then Kelly, if you want to jump in with some tools, I think that'd be really helpful.
Yeah, for sure. When we're trying to help people get rid of the rot, the redundant, the outdated, the trivial information. Now, I work in the Microsoft cloud space, so I'm most familiar with tools that help to address data that lives in the 365 space. So that's where I'm going to focus. Microsoft Purview is the go-to. Data discovery, cataloging, classification, being able to identify where the sensitive information lies, and build custom sensitive information types to the type of work you do. Because there's a ton of great pre-built, trained options in there for Canadian customers and the types of things we store. but there could be things within your organization that are unique to you, and being able to track those things down and ensure that they're being handled and managed safely and properly is key too. Now, we have other tools that have come out, and I think some of these came out as a result of feedback from people to Microsoft after Copilot came out. So we have things like SharePoint Advanced Management, which is an add-on, and it gives those administrators more advanced tools to help them handle the content lifecycle, especially for files in SharePoint and OneDrive, and help them to address access concerns more quickly. If we figure out that someone has access to something they shouldn't, how can we lock it down as quickly as possible? Because before, we're dealing with a lot of PowerShell scripts, a lot of jumping between different admin centers, and so that can help speed up IT's ability to address things that we discover. Data access governance reports to figure out, maybe people are oversharing. They didn't even realize they had overshared. And then Microsoft aside, there are some third-party tools out there. So I don't know if either of you are familiar with AvePoint, but they have some SaaS solutions that are built on Azure, and they help you prepare and secure and optimize your data. And what I really like about their Insights offering is you can figure out where the risk is, prioritize it, and then not only do you have that report, but now you can remediate right from the same pane of glass. So I find that some customers are looking into those additional tools because they have small IT teams, or they have large IT teams, but they don't have enough time to get it all done.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the points that Brian was making that I agree with is, larger organizations may have more people, but they also have more data, and they also tend to be sharing more data, and they have potentially not necessarily riskier data, but just the sheer quantity and the likelihood of maybe having data where it shouldn't be. So I think that's good. And then another trend I'm seeing is building searchability tools into areas maybe that you wouldn't expect, like backup tools, and all of a sudden being able to leverage your backup platform as a means to identify pockets of risky data within your organization. So I think I think it's pretty powerful, and I think that's again where partnerships come in, and we talk to customers about those things fairly regularly. So let's kind of set the stage around the tooling that we see deployed. We sort of talked about what we're doing, what Kelly, what you're doing, Brian, what you're doing. For me, I find that if I'm doing presentations, I can sometimes generate an image that evokes the sentiment I want a lot easier than finding a stock image or taking a picture myself of something. And so really trying to communicate with people, I'm trying to use AI to help with that. We talked a little bit about some of the challenges and identifying ways to measure. I like the whole proof of productivity concept. We're not going to do a proof of concept. We're going to do a proof of productivity. We're going to identify ways we're going to save time. So I think that's really powerful. I think looking at data management as a giant hurdle that we have to get through. So let's talk a little bit about the tooling that we're seeing deployed and that. So what are some of those basic things that we're seeing? Are customers kind of following the same path, Kelly, that you mentioned, where they're doing meeting summaries, they're and I guess how do they move into doing more sort of intermediate uses of the tools?
So I think when we talk about meeting summarization, prepping for meetings, composing emails, or trying to get to the inbox zero using AI tools, that is step one, like you mentioned. Now getting to step two, we've bought back the time. We've now freed up a little bit of our time to then look into how can I use these tools to help with the specific things that I do in my department or with my job role. Part of that could be some kind of unique things that people will do is use it for coaching themselves. So how can I be a better speaker? How can I be a better communicator, and getting Copilot or an AI tool to give them feedback on the way that they're interacting with others, or even for upskilling. So helping people improve their skill sets and be able to move into different parts of the job. I think another big one too is focusing on content generation, or And it's not just like, write me a training agenda for this topic. It can be using it to help find the information that they need for content creation. It's the new way of searching as well, because these tools have, well, with Copilot, the semantic index behind the scenes, helping you to not have to use those keywords anymore to find information. Now it has these relationships between similar words, and it can find things that you may not have been able to locate because it was stuck in a data silo somewhere.
Yeah, I think that's really good. And then Brian, as you're, seeing customers, maybe not as hands-on, but you're seeing, people use and advance beyond those sort of intro use cases. What are some of the use cases that you think really resonate?
Yeah, I think Kelly's bang on. And to your point, it's got to start with the basics, the easy things. Like, let's get some quick wins from a user adoption perspective. Let's have them get that great feeling of, wow, I just saved 10 minutes by clicking that button versus having to do this myself. But very quickly, we need to get to the next couple of stages. And I think if we start with each individual user and some of the, I'll call them hero productivity use cases, how do we then get into more team-based needs, right? So the needs of a marketing team versus the needs of a sales organization. Then we could zoom out, look at it from an organizational perspective. I think there's going to be, and it's started, but I think there's going to be an explosion over the next 12 to 18 months of industry specific AI use cases, right? Yeah. So, someone's going to perfect a prompt or a series of prompts specific to a use case in a OT environment, in a mine in, a remote area of the world, right? And then it's going to get captured and shared, and we're going to start to see things get really granular and really specific. But again, we need to, crawl before we walk and walk before we run. And I think that it's really right now for most organizations. There's some that are way ahead. We've had some customers that we have worked with that were part of the Copilot early adopters program that had the tool even 6 to 9 months before it was available for purchase. And that organization specifically that we've been speaking with is way ahead of the vast majority. And I think there's going to be this desire to become an early adopter. Obviously at CDW, we've been an early adopter of certain AI tools, and we look to use that as a competitive advantage, in our business. And I think there's going to be just this kind of race for organizations to continue to speed up, but it's going to become more nuanced. It's going to become more creative. I think creativity and curiosity are what is going to unlock a lot of these new use cases. And it's just, to Kelly's point earlier, a super exciting time because nothing is the same. Nothing is, constant, right? We're in this brave new world of AI adoption.
Yeah, and so one thing I think you both kind of tiptoed up to, and maybe didn't come out and say specifically, but it definitely made me think about is something you're doing for the first time. So maybe you're building a business case for the first time, or maybe you're building a marketing plan. You're talking about team-based sort of value. Maybe you're a manager of a small team, or maybe you work for like a medium-sized enterprise or a medium-sized organization, and there's a certain level of there's a certain level of process that you want to develop that your organization doesn't have. I think being able to ask, okay, well, how do I, what does a good business case look like? What are all the components of a good business case? Or how do I take this and change the tone to be more relevant for my CFO or my CTO or my CEO? I think those are really good use cases. The other one I think Kelly sort of touched on this was it's really hard to have conversations with teams where you start with a blank whiteboard. I find most blank whiteboard conversations really don't go anywhere. And so you mentioned earlier, hey, we want 5 marketing terms, and we threw out 4 of them, but one of them, well, that's kind of close to what I was thinking about, and you go from there. I find that, especially with technical people, once we put something up in front of technical people, they will agree, pick it apart, dissect it, start arguments, whatever it happens to be. But having something to start with, a lot of times, speeds up that part of the conversation.
I have something to add to that. I always find the most effective thing to do is put an error in a document or on the screen. And it gets in the workshops, even it'll get people, they'll point it out and like, you're paying attention, this is great. And you are right, giving yourself or others that first draft for constructive feedback is much better than just trying to start with nothing. I think a lot of us enjoy being editors and critics more than we do like being the first draft writers. There was one other thing that popped into my head as you were speaking, and it was around like one of the big things that came up again and again: public service, nonprofit, engineering, construction, real estate firms. Hearing people that were in slightly more senior roles saying, I don't have time to answer the same questions over and over again. So although these AI tools are really great for subject matter experts to get to that final output really quickly, it can also help new people that want to have an opportunity to try and get some of those answers themselves first before going to that senior person to validate that what they've got is accurate.
I want to jump in on that real quick, because there's this other idea that I have around, can these tools be the solution for internal silos within organizations? And can we redefine how we communicate and collaborate, right? In the old world, I would wait for potentially someone else in a different department, different organization to bring me up to speed with what they and their team were doing and what their priorities were. And I would, consume that, and then I would bake it into my plan, or I'd make sure that I was aligned. I don't necessarily need them to tell me what their plans are. If they have, published a team meeting, or if they've published their strategic priorities, I can leverage AI tools to get all the information that I need without having to then, I still probably want to go book a meeting, maybe to get more nuance, but I can show up A, more prepared, or B, get a really quick set of information that just saves me time. And again, redefines, this idea of collaboration and alignment, right? Maybe we don't need to actually speak to each other to get most of our collaboration and alignment done, or we get most of it done via the tool and we take it to the next level in a face-to-face meeting.
Yeah, and I like the back and forth. One of the things that came up on a podcast we did not too long ago, by the time this comes out, it'll be 3 or 4 episodes before. But so we had Janik Alford on the podcast, and he was with FinTrack at the time. I think he's since transitioned into a role with the Alberta provincial government. But he actually put up a really interesting diagram, and what he was showing was his organization and how they work together. You've got a purchasing department, you've got legal, you've got all these different teams that have to work together. And what he was proposing was, what if we had an AI employee that really sat in between these different departments, or was able to be queried about the department. And similar to a lot of organizations are using chatbots to assist their service desk. So how do I reset my password? Well, now I've got an up-to-date document that a chatbot can refer to, and my customers are able to, my internal customers are able to really resolve that issue easily. Well, to your point, Brian, what if we had our legal department had a chatbot, and I could go to that and get, maybe it's only 40% of the questions I have answered, but to what Kelly was talking about, that's going to reduce the overall workload on that team. And so I think that's really, really powerful. And one of the things that I've been talking to customers about is, let's think about this in sort of 3 different phases. I think this year we've really focused in on the AI assistant. And I think that's why Copilot and some of these individual tools are really powerful, is because they're assisting us to curate data, start a document and generate it, or helping us find what we're looking for, communicate in a better way. Really, that assistant role. More and more, the AI conversations we're having is around an agent. We're going to empower it to do something. So to your point there, I think it's really powerful, is let's create an agent that summarizes our goals and objectives going into the new year. And now if maybe it's a department that doesn't have as much to direct linkage to what I'm doing, they've got something they can go to and get answers for. And then I think if you look at sort of a third phase, really this AI employee, and not employees that are going to replace people, but employees that are going to augment teams and help curate information, present information, answer questions. I think that's really kind of what I'm seeing us as we evolve. So, you know, let's talk kind of into as we go beyond some of the tooling we've talked about. I mean, you know, the AI adoption, and we're talking about some of these you know, go forward use cases. Where are the tools going? So you know, Kelly, when you think about going into 2025, knowing that entering 2025, things have changed rapidly since then they were entering 2024. Where are we kind of starting at in 2025? What are the things that you want to see people taking advantage of? And then how do you think it's going to progress in 2025? Knowing this is a crystal ball moment, we're prognosticating.
Well, it's November now, and we're just getting access to the ability to build our own custom agents. Mm-hmm. So I do see a lot of, like you were just discussing, people using this to take that knowledge base and then create a way for people to interact with it. Where the new year will bring us, I feel, is shifting how we're interacting. Instead of just using text, the multimodal. So first, how we prompt. So we do see in certain places, there's certain AI tools that let us use our voice. So we can, it's basically voice to text. But now we have the ability, you know, with ChatGPT and others, to have it talk back to us. We just a little while ago saw that with Copilot. It was kind of fun. Now I'm having a real conversation back and forth. The other side of this too is how I'm putting the input in. Vision, being able to see what's on the screen and have greater context to what I'm doing in the moment while I'm asking the question. So those are the two places I think we're going to see a big trend and shift, and more announcements around in the new year.
Yeah, and interesting thing there, and if you checked out YouTube videos, allowing control over your PC, which is a whole different sort of shadow IT potential issue.
Oh yeah.
So Brian, you know, again, like you're having these conversations with customers, and obviously people are excited about certain aspects of this. You know, what are you seeing kind of going into 2025, and as we go through the year, you know, how are you excited? What do you think we're going to get to in the new year?
Yeah, I'm really hopeful that prompt engineering becomes a more well understood universal concept. Mm-hmm. And you know, we were joking around earlier that AI can't read our minds, it can read our prompts. Mm-hmm. But how many people are actively upskilling their prompt engineering capabilities? How many people are practicing prompt engineering on a, you know, hourly, daily, weekly, monthly basis, right? I have completely changed the way that I work, and I can't remember the last time I Googled something at work, because I have made it a habit to simply use one tool or another. So I think prompt engineering hopefully becomes more than just a buzzword, and it becomes something that everybody is focusing on, both at the individual and at the organizational level. The other thing is, by the end of next year, I would position that every digital workspace tool or digital workspace application will have Gen AI baked in, mm-hmm. right? So this isn't just a Microsoft Copilot, you know, Apple Intelligence. This is every tool that we use to do the work that we do will have some type of Gen AI baked in. And if we get to that point, again, how much more important is the ability to use prompt engineering and really effective prompts to get our work done. So I think I'm tracking both of those two pieces really, really closely.
Yeah, the prompt engineering is a really interesting one too, because I think people go about it different ways too. You know, everything from putting into ChatGPT, hey, help me build a good prompt for this, but also, you know, one of the things that Eva Weens, one of our peers, was mentioning to me is ask it the question you want to ask it, but have it ask you 5 clarifying questions before it actually gives you the response. I think that's a really novel way of approaching that. And so, yeah, I think you know, both of the examples from both of you are really good there. Where are we at with, you know, needing you know, AI ready devices? Because I know going into this year, I know that was a big, you know, it was a big topic. Obviously, we talked to a lot of customers about it. I'm starting to see, or at least feel, that more and more of these tools are now, you know, offloading to my local device, and Anyway, in your experience, like where are you starting to see that? Obviously, Apple Intelligence, you mentioned that, but how is that manifesting?
I think first and foremost, we need to recognize there has been incredible innovation in the chipset market around AI-ready devices, and the ecosystem is a lot more plentiful than it was in a pre-Copilot plus PC or AI PC world. So I think there's going to be a lot of competition. I think there's going to be a lot of investment. I think that's going to be a really good thing because it's going to drive a lot of innovation. Where are we? I'll use a baseball analogy because it's World Series time. World Series just wrapped up, and I think we're probably, if we're honest, and if our great partners are honest, we're probably still in the either pre-game warm-up or very early innings. So I think that there's a lot of excitement. We do have some early adopters. We do have certain organizations that are really excited to get this tool into the hands and kind of marry it with the power of a lot of the Gen AI tools that maybe they've invested in. But I would also say at the same time, continuing with the baseball analogy, the innings are getting shorter. So maybe we haven't really started the game, but maybe, each inning will only have 1 out versus 3 outs. Yeah. So this speed to adoption and this accelerated adoption is going to be really, really quick, which again, just drives and reinforces it. Yep, we have some time, but not much. And once, the game starts, it's going to happen really, really quick. So we need to have a plan. We need to be prepared. We need to tie that into our Windows 11 strategy and, our other kind of device refresh strategies and what that's going to look like as we approach next year.
Yeah, and Kelly, so when you think about that, whether it's AI ready devices or other aspects that organizations need to sort of focus in, what does that look like from your perspective, and as we go into the new year, what are some of those investments that organizations are going to need to make?
I'll start with the devices, because I was actually just chatting with one of our coworkers, Jeff Pedlow, about AI devices and hardware requirements. He's what's his new title? R&D technical architect. And honestly, you should have him as a future guest. He's my go-to for when it comes to hardware or just keeping current on the latest in AI. So we always try and get together every month and have a chat. And we were talking about, like you said, I liked your pregame warm-up analogy there. It was good, but we do know from a hardware perspective that AI and Apple, Apple's been at the forefront of that specialized hardware. So I think the challenge is there are still organizations out there with legacy devices. They were struggling to use them just for having too many browser tabs open, and then now they're trying to use it for these AI tools. And if you don't have a device that's got good NPUs, because that's the thing that's going to accelerate your ability to use AI on the device, you're going to have challenges. Now, from talking to Jeff and how these Apple graphics cards, I can't get over it. 75% of your available RAM can be used for that AI tool to process. That means that we now don't have to think about cloud AI. We can now think about what can we actually run on the device itself. So having more powerful AI models and language models having more space to do their work, that's pretty exciting. I wish I was more up to speed on Copilot plus PC. And whenever I have questions, I always go to Dallas on our team. He's one of the Microsoft solution specialists, and he's the one that keeps up on that. I would say that, and I'll say it, I'm not on Windows 11 yet. And that I think will be a goal for me for 2025 is to get into Windows 11 and using AI and Copilot with Windows 11, because I think that is the shift where people are going, and they're going to expect that productivity assistant to be in all the places they are, not just in the browser, not just in their Office apps. And so with that in mind, one of the challenges is, as much as I love that Microsoft wants to have a Copilot for every experience, there are a lot of Copilots. And so kind of tying back to that user education piece, we have to either narrow the number of tools that people can use to keep it simpler, or provide more education to people, because there is no silver bullet when it comes to AI tools. You're going to use slightly different ones for different purposes to have a good experience. And so education, training, it doesn't just stop with that 1 hour end user session. Continuing to have conversations, building user groups, having people come together to show off all those cool use cases that they've come up with and showing their peers and getting them excited, and also keeping them up to date on what's changing.
Yeah, I
And I
like
think
that
that's
being
part of
able.
any good adoption strategy, right? Like it's not just for AI, but in general.
Yeah, and I think finding those change agents, finding the people that have the inquisitiveness and that sort of flexible mental model, they can be advocates for the change. I think is key. And I love that you called out Jeff and Dallas. I talk to Dallas regularly. I love Dallas. He's a great guy, and he's been really supportive of the messaging with the podcast. And so shout out to Dallas and Jeff. I appreciate that. So how I guess the last thing I want to ask is a two-parter. First of all, are there any resources that you would recommend for people to use to kind of stay up? I obviously, Kelly, you just mentioned your peers, and it's great because we can't all know everything, and obviously finding those change agents, finding those people that are excited in the organization can help out. Are there any other, maybe it's blogs, maybe it's podcasts, maybe it's just different news sources. Are there areas that you go to just kind of keep up on information that you would recommend people check out?
There's lots. LinkedIn definitely is a good place to go because there's a lot of smart people there sharing things that usually on the cutting edge. Definitely will go to Reddit and other places like that because that's where we have more of that informal type of conversation. Lots of people getting together to try and problem solve. I think one thing actually that I like is the idea of the prompt-a-thon. Microsoft does put on a lot of prompt-a-thon events, and I think getting people together in a room with a similar objective, which is to find and curate those prompts to get the outcomes they want, can be really, really valuable. So again, it's getting people together in the room. It's not necessarily something where I'm doing it on my own, but that would be a big one. Just because it kind of amplifies, but it accelerates the speed at which you're coming to new solutions or novel solutions about how to use these things and how to ask the questions to get the right answers. What about you, Brian?
Yeah, I didn't know about the prompt. To your point around prompting, I think that's a great idea. I think when we can learn from each other, that's one of the reasons I like the podcast. Is I'm learning things from Karen, or from you mentioned Karen earlier, and I was thinking
That's
like
okay.
Karen Skapsky on LinkedIn is I've seen some of the posts she's made. She's great. But Kelly's mentioning prompting, and you mentioned prompt engineering before. But yeah, learning from each other. But what are some of the resources that you'd recommend?
Yeah, I'm a big podcast guy. I won't maybe go on the record with any of my favorite podcasts, but you can absolutely find a plethora of AI podcasts with some really brilliant people looking at AI from a whole bunch of different areas. So there's not a commute that I have that doesn't involve, or a train ride that I have that doesn't involve a podcast. And generally it's around AI. I'll talk about some other things that CDW has specifically done, because I think there are these are replicable things that other organizations can do as well. So we have AI communities, we have user groups, we have feedback forums, we have surveys. I constantly am scrolling through the questions around AI to see what other people are asking, the answers that they're getting. I'm always asking people that I know are leveraging Copilot or some other tool, hey, what's your favorite prompt recently? Or what have you done with Copilot recently? Every one-on-one that I have now, there's that, 5 minutes either at the beginning or the end where we're sharing those, examples and building momentum collectively so that we can, again, I said it earlier, but turn these interactions into habits, right? Both as individuals and as an organization. The other thing to call out is there is an immense amount of tools and resources and investments being made by our amazing partner community. And they are bringing their best and brightest people, and they are bringing their resources to the table to say, hey, you have a AI use case that you'd love to test out, we'd love to do that with you, or we'd love to be at the table with you. So I think historically, those partnership relationships where maybe, hey, we know what we want and you can provide it, where I think we can get together around the table and kind of co-create the future for each of these individual clients and organizations.
So I'm thinking that we, similar to a hackathon, we now need to do a promptathon, and I think that would be so. Okay, well, we're gonna wrap up the podcast. Kelly, really appreciate you jumping in. I think you've got a really unique perspective. I appreciate you bringing that to the podcast, and we'll definitely reach out to Jeff and Dallas and see about a future podcast. Brian, it's always a pleasure. I definitely enjoy working with you, and I appreciate you bringing your perspective. I think the really thing I like about the podcast here is being able to bring ideas, and I really appreciate you both bringing ideas. So thank you, Kelly. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you so much for having me. This was an absolute pleasure, and it's just nice to be able to talk about one of my favorite subjects with people that are interested in hearing me. So, have a great rest of your day, and thanks for your time.
Thanks, Kelly, and Brian. I appreciate it.
Anytime. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
So that's been our CDW Canada Tech Talks podcast. I've been your host, KJ Burke. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Brian. Join us next time. We'll have another podcast around another topic, first Tuesday of every month. And be safe, keep innovating, and check out your prompt engineering. Thank you.